What is poppin' YouTube? Doing my wide receiver dynasty rankings heading into the offseason. I know we're making some dynasty content. It's crazy. It's been a minute since I've made some dynasty content, so let's get into it. Starting off here in my S tier, we have Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and CeeDee Lamb. Starting it off with Justin Jefferson, really nothing that we need to dive into on his year this year. The biggest thing is that he did get injured, but even though he only played in 10 games, he still had 100 targets. Now, of course, it wasn't the 184, 167 that he played in the 17 games the last 2 seasons, but still 100 targets in 10 games. We're talking 10 targets a game, 68 receptions, 15.8 yards per reception. His actually yards per reception went up this year compared to the last 2 years. Of course, receiving touchdowns were down. 20.2 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 5 on a fantasy points per game basis. No reason for us to push Justin Jefferson down. Now, the big concern for a lot of managers with Justin Jefferson is what's going to be happening with this quarterback position in the offseason. I think Kirk Cousins does get re-signed, but I'm still confident in Justin Jefferson and having him here as my wide receiver 1. But I will be clear, it's a little bit closer than it has been the last few seasons. Then move on to Jamar Chase. And this is probably where I'm going to catch some flack because there's a lot of you that just saw exactly what CeeDee Lamb has done this season, where CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver 1 on a fantasy points per game basis, 23.7 fantasy points per game. Where we're looking at Jamar Chase, finishes as the wide receiver 11 this season on a points per game basis with 16.4. My big thing is Joe Burrow got hurt, and with Jamar Chase, only 145 targets in 16 games, 100 receptions, 1,200 yards. But really, the receiving touchdowns just were not there this season with only 7 compared to CeeDee Lamb, who had 12. And when you're looking at CeeDee Lamb versus Jamar Chase, 145 targets in 2023, 181 targets for CeeDee Lamb. And yes, I understand targets are earned, not given. And that's what we like to do on this channel. But for me, it's more about, it's been Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. And for me, CeeDee Lamb has entered into the S tier stratosphere. So I do like some CeeDee Lamb, and that is who I have here in this tier. Moving on to my A tier, starting off this A tier, we have AJ Brown. And this tier, with AJ Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Puka, it's very close. And so if you would argue with me that Puka should be ahead of AJ Brown because of age, because of production as a rookie, I hear it. If you are arguing that Amon-Ra St. Brown should be over AJ Brown, I hear you. The thing is with me with AJ Brown, he's tied to Jalen Hurts, and I know there's all the rumors that he's unhappy with the situation with the Eagles, and we'll have to see how they do in the playoff game. Like I said, I'm recording this on Monday. We'll be coming out on Tuesday. 158 targets, 106 receptions, wide receiver 8 on a fantasy points per game basis. I do understand AJ Brown is 26 years old, but for me, when we're looking at the prime, if we're looking at the next 3 years, AJ Brown, if he's with the Eagles, absolutely dominant wide receiver. So I have AJ Brown here as my wide receiver 4. Wide receiver 5 is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown, the sun god himself, 24 years old. And we've been seeing what he's been doing. Wide receiver 4 on a points per game basis this season with 20.7 fantasy points per game. 164 targets, 16 games, 119 receptions. My man is the slot king. Reminded me this season a lot of what we've seen from Cooper Kupp. Just the way that he's able to get open. Jared Goff's able to find him in that slot very consistently. I like Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's in a very stable situation. I think even with the big worry with Amon-Ra St. Brown, what happens if another big-time wide receiver comes in? Well, not another big-time wide receiver, but Sam Laporta absolutely emerged this season as the tight end 1 in fantasy and probably dynasty. And so for me, I am not as concerned about Amon-Ra St. Brown as what some others might be due to what might happen this offseason. But I do like Amon-Ra St. Brown here. And then rounding out this A tier with Puka Nacua, we saw what he did in the first playoff game. But that aside, 17.6 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 6 on a fantasy points per game basis. Puka Nacua, 159 targets. And yes, are we a little bit worried about, is Cooper Kupp going to retire? Is Matthew Stafford going to? I don't care. My man is an absolute target hog. And so you got to put Puka Nacua, I understand, doesn't have the draft pedigree, being a 5th round draft pick, doesn't have the measurables as some other of these rookie wide receivers. That's why we didn't have him high. And that's why NFL GMs in the draft did not have him as high as well. I do like Puka Nacua here in this tier, and I think you definitely need to have him here pretty high up. Starting it off in the B tier, we got Garrett Wilson. Got his jersey right there. We're going to be hanging it up here shortly. Chris Olave, Tyreek Hill, Brandon Ayuk, Nico Collins. The thing with this tier, Garrett Wilson, man, I had him as potential to have the wide receiver 1 overall finish this season, with the fact that we thought Aaron Rodgers was going to play a full season. What happens? Aaron Rodgers plays like 1 series, essentially gets pulled out because of that Achilles tear that he had out for a season. 2023, the measurables, the production actually went up compared. 2023, the stats, the hindsight looking at the full picture, actually went up compared to 2022. Played 17 games both seasons, 147 targets last season. This season, 168 targets, 95 receptions this season, 83 receptions last season. 95 receptions with who was throwing him the ball. Cracked 1,000 receiving yards. Of course, had one less touchdown, so his points per game numbers were 0.2 lower. So he went from 12.7 to 12.5 this season. Wide receiver 32 on a points per game basis, but his air yards went up about 250. So for me, Garrett Wilson's just always open. So if you could get a quarterback that could throw him the ball when he's open, we're talking about Garrett Wilson as an elite level asset. And I honestly think Garrett Wilson should be closer in the A tier, but he hasn't produced like those guys. So he's leading off my B tier. Then we go to Chris Olave, who, again, same quarterback issues that are happening with Garrett Wilson on a lesser scale are happening here with Chris Olave. Derek Carr wasn't good this year. Jameis Winston, when he was able to air it out, was good. But then we look at even last season. I feel for Chris Olave a ton. There's been a ton of injuries that have happened. Still got to have him here in our B tier. Feel pretty good about his age. I know he's a year older than Garrett Wilson, but still, we have to feel pretty good about having Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson here in our B tier. Then we move on to Tyreek Hill, and he probably should have beat CeeDee Lamb for the wide receiver 1 points per game in fantasy, but of course he did only play 16 games, sat out week 17. So for him, 23.5 fantasy points per game, put him as the wide receiver 2. And there's a lot of reasons for us to be a little bit concerned about Tyreek Hill heading into 2024. I mean, he's 29 years old. He's talked about only wanting to play a few more years in the NFL. I know they just lost to the Chiefs. I know there's some concerns about Tua, but my man was an absolute league winner. And when we're talking about actual fantasy football next season, Tyreek Hill is probably going to be drafted in the same range, like we said, with the Justin Jeffersons, the Jamar Chases, and the CeeDee Lambs. And honestly, he's probably going to be argued that you should draft him either wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 in redraft. But in Dynasty, he is the perfect win now candidate. I can't push him any lower down the board because I don't care if he only plays one more season after this. This is the appropriate ranking to have him here in the B tier if you need to go get a chip. Next guy is going to be Brandon Ayuk here in the tier. Brandon Ayuk's absolutely stepped up this season. Like we said, the last 2 seasons, there's been question marks, whether it was him in the doghouse, whether it was him and all the mouths to feed. Brandon Ayuk took that step as the alpha in the 49ers offense, just going to continue to get better. Then rounding out the B tier with Nico Collins, I hear you. Maybe I have Nico Collins too high. Maybe I have his playoff implications, what's happening with him and CJ Stroud. I know there's the potential that the Houston Texans bring in a free agent wide receiver this next season, but I think that hurts like Dalton Schultz more than it's going to hurt Nico Collins and or Tank Dell. So I like Nico Collins here. Absolutely has amazing chemistry with CJ Stroud rounding out the B tier. Then we move on to our C tier, and we started off with Tank Dell, Rashee Rice, T. Higgins, Zay Flowers, Jalen Waddle, Jordan Addison, DJ Moore, and Michael Pittman Jr. Starting off with Tank Dell. I know he's out. He got out for season, had the injury. But honestly, if you debated if Tank Dell did not get hurt, I think we're talking about Tank Dell in the B tier. Honestly, not just starting off the C tier. And there's a lot of debates that you can make. Like, I really have Tank Dell and Rashee Rice heading up this tier. And all these other guys, you can kind of debate how you want to go. Rashee Rice had an absolute fabulous rookie season. And maybe in Dynasty, he should be the wide receiver 1. Maybe in Dynasty, Rashee Rice should be the wide receiver 2 of this rookie class instead of how I have it with Tank Dell. But I do like Rashee Rice too with the Kansas City Chiefs. T. Higgins, I think T. Higgins is going to land somewhere other than Cincinnati. I'm a Bengals fan. I just can't see them paying him the amount of money that he probably deserves to get paid. So could T. Higgins end up in the Houston Texans? Could he end up with Kansas City? I just think there's so much potential for T. Higgins that this is where I currently have him ranked in the Dynasty landscape. I know he's older than like a Rashee Rice or Tank Dell, but I like the overall upside that he still provides. Then we got Zay Flowers, who had an absolute fabulous rookie season for the Baltimore Ravens. I just think the overall upside, like, it's very clear that I know the Baltimore Ravens are absolutely killing it. Still playing fiddle to Mark Andrews. I still think they need another receiving piece that they're probably going to try to find this next season. Because as much as OBJ, they had their flowers, but they need a clear, defined wide receiver too. And whether that's going to be a veteran or a rookie needs to be seen. But I still like Zay Flowers here. Jalen Waddle, I was a lot higher on Jalen Waddle coming into the season in Dynasty. He's kind of proven me wrong this season, whether it's just injuries, whether it's just his total overall production. Harder for me to rank Jalen Waddle any higher than here in the C tier. Jordan Addison, same thing. We love the way that he started off the season. Kind of cooled down just due to Kirk Cousins getting hurt, due to Justin Jefferson coming back. We'll see what ends up happening with Minnesota and that whole quarterback situation, but that's why I have him a little bit lower here in the C tier. Then we move on to DJ Moore. And DJ Moore arguably should be a wide receiver 1 in Dynasty based on what he's doing. I think just the ageism of what I am doing when I'm looking at these Dynasty rankings, I'm saying, what is this going to look like in February? For me, DJ Moore, we don't know what's happening with this quarterback situation, whether it's going to be Justin Fields or Caleb Williams. Arguably, both of those quarterbacks are still better than anything that he saw in Carolina. He is going to be 27 years old. I still have DJ Moore looking at him, looking at the way that he is going to be performing coming in the next 2 seasons. I think he could have that Stephon Diggs Buffalo Bills, like where he just is absolutely breaking out. He already kind of broke out this season. I want to see a full breakout as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football for DJ Moore. And that's why I have him right here in the C tier of these dynasty rankings. I know he's one of the older wide receivers here, which is crazy to say because there was a long time we were talking about him as a young buck coming up, but I do like him here in the Michael Pittman. Anthony Richardson got hurt. Hard for me to put him any lower than here in the C tier. Then we move on to our D tier. And this is where we start to mix some of this age with this youth. We got Devontae Smith, clear 1B to AJ Brown. If something were to happen to AJ Brown, I know he pulled a lot of things off of his social media about the Eagles, and Devontae Smith goes to being the clear wide receiver 1 for the Philadelphia Eagles with Jalen Hurts. Devontae Smith, of course, ends up getting bumped up in our dynasty rankings. Jackson Smith and Jigba. There's a few of us truthers still out there that believe that he could still end up being, I don't think we can argue that he's going to be better than Puka in the long haul now, but I still think he could be the clear wide receiver 2 in this class in the coming years. I mean, he was fighting for targets with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. Really didn't start getting going until about week 8 of the season, which typically happens for rookies. They typically start off a little bit slower unless you're an absolute stud. And so for me, I'm a little bit worried about Jackson Smith and Jigba. We'll probably do a video where we talk about the 2023-2024 class, how we draft them, how we're valuing Jackson Smith and Jigba currently right now. But like I said, right here in the D tier, he is behind Rashee Rice, Tank Dell, Zay Flowers, Puka, Jordan Addison in this class. So he's a little bit lower for me. But I do like JSN's overall outlook heading into 2024. I'm still trying to trade for him everywhere. We got Drake London here next, and Drake London has been absolutely nothing but a stud. The only issue is he's had literally 0 people throwing him the ball. Desmond Ridder, Taylor Heineke, and it's been like that for the last 2 seasons. Get my man a quarterback. They got Arthur Smith out. That's going to help Drake London a ton. I like his overall upside. I think he's a cheaper type T Higgins type build. We're still on that rookie contract, which is still very exciting going into year 3. Sometimes a full breakout is going to be available. It's just hard when you start pushing these wide receivers out into the year 3, hoping for that year 3 breakout because there's only so many Corey Davises in the world. And so I have Drake London here in the D tier. Then we move on to Jaden Reed, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Jaden Reed with the Green Bay Packers. All these young weapons that Jordan Love has. We saw him absolutely ball out against Dallas Cowboys. I like Jaden Reed. I don't know who they're bringing in. I don't know if they're going to continue to build on. I like that trajectory, but there's a lot of these wide receivers in Green Bay. I like Jaden Reed the most, but you still got Christian Watson. You still got Wicks. You still got Romeo Doubs. Hard for me to tell you where to put Jaden Reed other than here. Then we got DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel. Both of these older wide receivers a little bit. DK Metcalf is still continuing to be the alpha for the Seattle Seahawks. What's happening with Geno Smith? What's going to happen with their quarterback situation? Their coaching positions with Pete Carroll? How is that offense going to change? To be determined, but I do have DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel here. George Pickens, like we said, Steelers are probably going to have to get off of Kenny Pickett. I know he's a rookie. I know it's exciting, but they're probably going to have to figure out a better quarterback solution. I still like George Pickens here in the D tier. And then Stephon Diggs. Like we said, these older wide receivers, they still make their way. They're still competitive. They still have a ton of value. Like Stephon Diggs is not dying and all of a sudden he's going to be off your roster. This isn't Derrick Henry. This is a legit tied to Josh Allen. Can he continue to be the one? I don't know. I think they're probably going to have to bring in another wide receiver, whether it's through the draft or free agency this next season. But I do like Stephon Diggs here in the D tier. And then moving on to the E tier, we got a bunch of competitive guys. We got Devontae Adams and Mike Evans, both who showed out this season. Both proved to be wide receiver 1s on a points per game basis. A lot of people said Mike Evans couldn't do it with Baker Mayfield. He honestly looked better with Baker Mayfield than he did with Tom Brady because I feel like Tom Brady didn't like to just jack it up to Mike Evans, whereas Baker Mayfield said he's down there somewhere, threw it down the field. Christian Watson, like we said, kind of talking about Jaden Reed. I have him as a second wide receiver here after Jaden Reed in the Green Bay Packers offense. Like I said, there's a lot of mouths to feed, a lot of young bucks coming up. So who's going to actually emerge in Dynasty? I don't know, but I like Christian Watson's build. I like the way that Jordan Love is looking. So we want a piece of that offense, have Christian Watson here in the E tier. Then we got Josh Downs, who Josh Downs had the connection with Anthony Richardson, honestly had the connection with Gardner Minshew. The big thing with Josh Downs, he got a little bit nicked up this season, where we could be talking about Josh Downs could have been in the D tier if he had an absolute great year. And we could be talking about Josh Downs maybe even passing up Jackson Smith and Jigba because there were some weeks where that's what Josh Downs was doing. He was an absolute waiver wire darling there for about 3 or 4 weeks where he's putting up solid fantasy football production. Can do that over a full season? I think that is where I am at with Josh Downs here in the E tier. Then we got Cooper Kupp, Mr. Old Man Cooper Kupp. Clearly the days of him being the wide receiver 1 points per game are over, but I still think he could have high-end wide receiver 2, even low-end wide receiver 1 value. It's hard to say how healthy he was this season because he was dealing with the one ankle injury and then he hurt the other. So Lily had both ankles hurt as he was an older wide receiver. With age, the age cliff for these wide receivers happens eventually. I mean, usually these guys right around 31, 32 get hurt. So we could be looking at Cooper Kupp really only having 1 more year of value. But that 1 more year of value could be super valuable. So I still have him here in the E tier. Chris Godwin is interesting because Mike Evans is going to be a free agent. So Chris Godwin could be the one on this Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. But even still, maybe the Tampa Bay Buccaneers look at their team and they've really needed to tear it down for a little bit. I know they got a ton of huge contracts on the roster. So Chris Godwin could be a trade candidate and or alpha level wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers heading into the 2024 season. So I like some Chris Godwin. Then rounding it out with Amari Cooper and Terry McLaurin. Like I said, it's crazy that we're talking about these guys at the back end of dynasty rankings because Amari Cooper just had himself a fabulous year. But of course, both these guys are a little bit older. If you play dynasty, you know managers love to get these young wide receivers, even if they haven't produced anything. Even if Amari Cooper is producing more than Jackson Smith and Jigba, you can't trade Amari Cooper and go get JSN because that's just not how dynasty works. You got to factor in the age. But both these guys, I think Deshaun Watson, if he comes back this next season with the Cleveland Browns, which based on his contract, he most likely will be. Amari Cooper had a pretty good connection with Deshaun Watson. I don't think Deshaun Watson's left for dead. He's no Joe Flacco, but we'll see what ends up happening there. And then Terry McLaurin should be getting a new quarterback, probably getting a new coach with the Washington Commanders. So we like that for him too. Like I said, guys, we're going to be putting out a ton more dynasty content. So I appreciate you guys sticking around. We will be doing my rookie rankings. We will be talking through running back rankings in dynasty. We'll be doing some cornerstone rankings. We'll be doing some mock drafts. So if you like Dynasty Fantasy Football content, make sure you tune in. And if you're part of the redraft audience that maybe you never played Dynasty before, this is going to be the off season to get involved with a Dynasty Fantasy Football League. So like I said, guys, appreciate you guys for tuning in so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.